Shabbat Shalom. Going to look at Exodus 13 this morning. And of course, this is the chapter that comes immediately after Exodus 12, which is about the Passover, which is the season we've just celebrated. Now we're counting the Omer. What day are we on? 14. We're 14. Actually, you counted last night.
You count 14 tonight. We're on 13 now. You count 14 tonight.
Guys, if you do it your way, you're not going to make it to 50 on Sunday.
We count one. Did we count one at the end of Sunday?
Yeah. Sundown on Saturday is the beginning. And you start counting on sundown on Sunday. That's day one. Gerald has it wrong. I need to talk to him. He's telling us all a day behind. See what I'm saying? That this, yes, day one was Saturday evening to Sunday evening.
Yeah, so when did you say one?
You don't. You start on day two. You don't count the first day.
Because that's the beginning. So you got to go a whole day to count a day.
So you never say day one?
Not the way I understand it. Believe me, I'm no authority.
You never say day one?
Well,
You just start counting with day two?
well, you start, well, I mean, how do you count on one? This is,
Because from Saturday...
all you'd have to do is say, this is the day we begin counting the Omer. That's what you say.
Okay. So Saturday to Sunday is day one.
Yeah, it is the first day.
Thank you.
And you don't say it.
All right, go on. I'm not worried about it. I have other things to do.
In any case, tonight is day 15 at sundown. I mean, if you think about it, Sunday is the first day, Saturday is the 14th day. That's how calendars work. And the evening thing is confusing to us. Have you ever wondered, when did we start saying the day begins at midnight? That is the most unintuitive thing. Where did that come from? And yet, we're just used to it now. The day begins in the middle of the night. It's never been that way. It's either in the morning or in the evening, but we now have this. It's funny how, I mean, at least to me, it seems totally normal to think that the day starts at midnight. But you think, where did that come from? Of course, to the Jews, it starts at evening. In any case, we have counted 2 weeks. And we have got 5 more weeks to the day of Shavuot. Exodus 13 is dealing with something. Passover, like all the feasts, shows us fundamental principles of God's nature. And one of the things about Passover that's very important to understand is the principle of the firstborn. Is the principle of what's first. The principle of what starts. Because when we look at nature, we find that everything belongs to God. The Psalms say, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And we know that. But what we often forget is He gives us things back. 100% of the stuff is His, but He says, you can keep it if you give me 10%. But the 10% is first. And He says, you can have all of the days but one. And that day is mine. I'm keeping that one. And we find as we look at possessions, conquered victories, whatever you want to say, that whatever is first is God's. And in terms of the inheritance, the firstborn belonged to God. And that makes the whole Passover experience much more meaningful because Pharaoh lost the firstborn and all of Egypt lost the firstborn because they refused to listen to God. So verse 1 of 13, Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Sanctify to me every firstborn, the first offspring of every womb among the sons of Israel. Both man and beast, it belongs to me. So what does it mean to sanctify it? Just to set it apart, right? Put it in a special place. Moses said to the people, Remember this day in which you went out from Egypt, from the house of slavery. For by a powerful hand Yahweh, or the Lord, brought you out from this place. And nothing leavened shall be eaten. On this day in the month of Abib, you are about to go forth. It shall be when Yahweh brings you to the land of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall observe this rite in this month. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a feast to Yahweh. Unleavened bread shall be eaten throughout the 7 days, and nothing leavened shall be seen among you, nor shall any leaven be seen among you in all your borders. You shall tell your son on that day, saying, It is because of what Yahweh did for me when I came out of Egypt. And it referring to Passover, shall serve as a sign to you on your hand, and as a reminder on your forehead, that the law of Yahweh may be in your mouth, for with a powerful hand the Lord brought you out of Egypt. Therefore you shall keep this ordinance at its appointed time from year to year. Hand and forehead, what does this remind you of in Judaism? Have you ever watched an Orthodox Jew pray? What's the first thing they do? They bind tefillin. Do you know what that means? They take the phylacteries and they put them around their arm and around their head, based upon the scripture in Deuteronomy that says, take this word, bind it on your forehead and on your hand. And of course, what this, to us simple-minded people, this refers to what you do and what you think. The hand in the Bible almost always, whatever your hand finds to do. When it speaks of the hand, it's what you do. When it speaks of the feet, it's where you go. When it speaks of the forehead or the head, it's the mind. In Stern's Complete Jewish Bible, he says, Moreover, it will serve as a sign on your hand and as a reminder between your eyes. So that, because the word really isn't forehead. I looked at the Hebrew word and it just means between. So that Adonai's Torah may be on your lips, because with a strong hand Adonai brought you out of Egypt. Now it goes on in verse 11, when the Lord brings you to the land of the Canaanite, as he swore to you and to your fathers, and gives it to you. He just keeps reminding them that he promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that the land would be theirs. See, in this whole thing we've been doing, the inheritance project, or entering the inheritance, you realize we're not creating an inheritance. We're going to something that God said was ours. That's what Israel's doing. God said, this land is yours. I promised it to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I promised I'd bring you back. Our inheritance is something that's already been designated by God. So when you come to this land, you shall devote to the Lord the first offspring of every womb, and the first offspring of every beast that you own. The males belong to the Lord. But every first offspring of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. But if you do not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And every firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. So what's that saying about the donkey? Why would you break its neck? It's not to be used by us. You get that? You either redeem it, which I'm sure people did. Donkeys were valuable. So they would redeem it with a lamb, and what would happen to the lamb? It would be sacrificed. Don't be confused here about what happens to the firstborn. The firstborn is offered and given to God. And this is part of the way creation is built. Like I said a little bit in the testimony, I'm struck by how God created the universe, He created the world, and we frequently question as to why He would have us do things, not realizing that He made it doing things the way He tells us just helps us in our walk. Otherwise, we're fighting the plan. It's a little bit like a person trying to live and ignore gravity. It doesn't work. Sooner or later, gravity will be your demise. It shall be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, "What is this?" Then you shall say to him, "With a powerful hand Yahweh brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. It came about when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that Yahweh killed every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to Yahweh the males, the first offspring of every womb, but every firstborn of my sons I redeem. So it shall serve as a sign on your hand and as phylacteries on your forehead, for with a powerful hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt." It goes then on to talk about that when Pharaoh let them go, God did not lead them by the land of the Philistines because He didn't think they were ready for warfare. So they went another way. And then it mentions here in verse 21, the Lord was going before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them on the way, a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. What I think is important to remember here is that the firstborn belongs to God, and there's something about the first in all of life that belongs to Him. If we don't understand this, it makes us live in opposition to our universe, if you will. And what it does is it means things don't go well for us. In the story about Cain and Abel, I don't know how old I was before I picked up on what was the difference between Cain and Abel's offering. All my life, to be honest with you, I was told the wrong story. They said, well, Abel's sacrifice was acceptable because it was blood, and Cain's wasn't because it was of the plants and animals. But we know that's not true. How many sacrifices in the temple are grain offerings? How many first fruits offerings are there of fruits and vegetables? That is not the problem. The problem is, now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. Genesis chapter 4. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering He did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. This becomes a very important thing for everyone who serves the Lord, because in our lives, those things which are first are not ours. If we attempt to keep them, it actually renders our lives vulnerable. I'll give you some examples, but you see this even in the teachings of Yeshua. What did Yeshua tell His disciples? You know, they ask in Mark 12, I think it was a scribe asking, what's the most important commandment? And He said, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself." When you think about that commandment, what is that commandment? God is first. That's what that commandment is. But then you know what else? He says that another way, which is exactly the same thing. He says, "Seek ye" what? First the kingdom, and then what will happen? All else, or all these things, will be added to you. If you seek first the kingdom and His righteousness, all this is added. So when you give God the first, then you find yourself in harmony with Him, and things go well. When you retain what is first, it makes you vulnerable to destruction. The classic story about this is what? Achan. Why? When God instructed them, He told Joshua exactly how to carry out the conquest of Jericho, didn't He? Every day they went around the wall, blowing the shofars and the trumpets. Then on the seventh day they went around 7 times. They blew the shofars, the trumpets. They were carrying the ark, the presence of God. The walls fell down. But when they went in there, they were not allowed to take anything from Jericho for themselves. Why? Where is Jericho in terms of the conquest of the land? First. All of it had to be devoted to God, just as it says here in Exodus 13. God said, "It's mine. If you find gold, silver, it comes to my house. Anything, either you bring it to me or you destroy it. There's nothing in Jericho that you can use for yourselves." This became very important for Israel because the next little town that they were to conquer was a place called Ai. They looked at it and they said, "This is a small podunk place. We'll just send a few men and conquer this place." What happened? They were destroyed. That several thousand men fell in battle. The others ran. I'm going to read you something. Joshua was very unhappy about this, as in Joshua 7. It says here that they chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted and became like water. What was the difference between Israel at Jericho and Israel at Ai? They were the same people. Joshua tore his clothes. He fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. What is this saying? They were in mourning. They were borne down to the ground in sorrow. They couldn't understand. Here God called us to go take our inheritance. We had this mighty victory. We come to this little town and we're utterly defeated. And what's more, why is defeat such a terrible problem in battle? Because everybody else hears. And what happens to your enemies? This gives them strength. So far, everybody that had attacked Israel had been destroyed, and there was fear all through the land. And Joshua said, "Ah, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us?" Does that sound like Joshua? What had happened to him? How many of you have ever been in a situation where fear entered and you found yourself completely changed? When you become afraid or terrified, you completely lose your focus, your belief. And I mean, I'm kind of picking on Joshua here, but I find it amazing because Joshua is a strong man in the Lord. But he's coming before the Lord and said, "Why'd you bring us here to destroy us?" And this is after the victory at Jericho. If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. What's he saying? Taking the inheritance is going to be too hard, I'm afraid. Oh Lord, what can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this. They will surround us and wipe out your name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name? I actually like this. Get a kick out of it. The Lord said to Joshua, "Stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. Go consecrate the people. Tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. That which is devoted is among you, O Israel. You cannot stand against your enemies until you remove it. What did it say in Exodus 13 about the firstborn? They're devoted to the Lord. Why does this have a lot of meaning for Levi?
Because it means if there's any one person in Levi that's not devoted to the Lord but is serving somewhere else, then the rest of us are defiled and can't enter into our inheritance.
In some way, it does mean that. It's interesting because you think, wow, that seems kind of brutal. But in this story, all of Israel was affected by the sin of how many people? One man who took some gold and silver and a beautiful cloth and hid it in his tent.
From Jericho, I take it.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I know it's my carnal mind, I guess, but I want to have an argument with God about, well, why didn't you at least just let Joshua know beforehand, that there was unfaithfulness? So that
I had these same things.
It just doesn't seem just.
It doesn't seem fair, does it?
No.
It's one of those things. I guess what came out of this to me is that I really want to understand how important the firstborn is to God. How important the first, and how many of us know in following the Lord that when we give God anything but our first, it doesn't go well for us. And I've thought about this story in a lot of ways, because when they find Achan, they take Achan and his whole family and destroy them, and it kind of makes you sick. And yet, we understand in the physical world there are certain transgressions you can't commit. I always come back to the Challenger and the fact that everybody involved with the Challenger did their utmost to see that spaceship go into space and for those people on board to be safe. And I think the teacher's name was Krista McAuliffe, whatever. Everyone wanted them to be safe. They spent millions of dollars. But the fact that they had not adequately understood the O-ring, and that O-ring failed, meant that it blew up. There was absolutely nothing you could do about it, because when it came to the point in the flight where that seal had to work, it didn't. Right there, while thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people were watching, the thing blew up. Sometimes we don't understand in the kingdom there are times like this. How many of you read the story about Uzzah touching the ark, and that just seems unfair? But here again, he was a Levite. He knew better.
Or for that matter, David's counting his army.
Yeah. There are certain things that just doesn't work. And here's what struck me. I've noticed in my life personally that for Joy and me, and before I was married, that I had to take the tithe out of my paycheck before I did anything with it. Because when I did it that way, I never spent it. I always gave. And I found that God tended to bless me financially. What's interesting, when you come to Malachi, God says to Israel, "Return to me and I will return to you." And Israel says, "How shall we return to you?" And what's God's answer? "You're robbing me." You're robbing me? How are we robbing you? This is what Israel says. And God says, "Bring the full tithe and the offering into my storehouse." And what does God say He'll do? He'll pour out a blessing you can't contain. He'll open the floodgates of heaven. Is that because God is just trying to make us behave us? No, I don't think that at all. God says, this is the way you'll find life. This is the way you'll be blessed. When you take into your house what isn't yours, you make yourself vulnerable to hurt. He loves us, so He tells us. And this has really come to me because I found myself struggling to organize my schedule so I can go over to the sanctuary a half an hour a day. And it's just like, wow. Is my life that important? And I can hear God saying, I love you. I sent my Son to die for you. But if you want to walk in kingdom fruitfulness, do it my way. This is the way the world is created. I mean, I sometimes think we think God makes rules, trying to see if we can go through the maze. No. His rules, His laws are how we can enjoy His magnificence and His provision. Okay.
I was just thinking, if you correlate what David did, what Hezekiah did, even what Cain did, it was trying to look at it. I mean, it goes back to what you said about Elisha and the servant.
Yep, it does.
It was going back to looking at the natural and in some way trying to judge if you were going to be taken care of and if it was going to be good for you by looking at the natural and counting it up and looking at it and saying, I'll offer to God out of what I think I need.
And it's actually thinking that the natural is all there is, or the natural is true.
It's judging your own might and your own ability by what you have and what you're producing. I mean, even Hezekiah, when he showed off what was in the temple, was like, I'm great enough. I can show off and be okay. And it wasn't. It
No.
bringing destruction to Israel.
No, I mean,
I don't know how that applies to first fruits, but it seems like it does.
when I've just been thinking about this and thinking, how do we look at this in a constructive way? Because we all know, and I don't have time to get into this today, but I think you all know that God said, I took Levi instead of the firstborn. In all Israel, I mean, God was legalistic about this. He counted the sons of Levi, and He counted the firstborn in Israel. There weren't quite enough sons of Levi, and others had to be redeemed with money. It had to be, God was letting Israel know that when He said the firstborn are His, He really meant that. They really did belong to Him. And, the Passover is absolutely required in Israel. Are you aware that it says in Numbers 9 that if you're clean and you're not on a journey and you neglect to observe Passover, you'll be cut off from the people? And Passover in some way celebrates the setting apart of the firstborn. It celebrates God. And another thing that I'll just share this with you, I think we should be really careful of taking anything into our house that belongs to God. This really got me thinking too, because sometimes, I don't know about you, God has really blessed the house of Aaron. He's blessed His people over the face of the earth. But how many of you sense God wants to take a step and pour out more blessing? I believe that. And I think there's being a distinction made between those who love the Lord and those who don't over the face of the earth. But one of the things I think in this firstborn principle is learning that if something belongs to God, don't take it into your house, which Achan did. And this reminds me, as we walk, I've noticed, in the Messianic movement I have more experience, but I was talking to Lenny, and Lenny was right there at the origins of the Vineyard and Calvary Chapel. Two of the big charismatic groups today. The biggest churches in America are... Yeah, well, the Shiloh community disappeared.
I know, but I mean, he was there.
Yeah,
at the very
but
beginning of
Calvary Chapel has the biggest churches in the country. There's a Calvary Chapel in Los Angeles that has, is it 27,000? But Lenny watched Chuck Smith and John Wimber break up. John Wimber, Vineyard, Chuck Smith, Calvary. And as I was listening to him, and he was talking about the fact, you know what caused that to break up? Was it theological differences? That's kind of the brush. It was because people lost the ability to get along. And what came to me is that one of the things that belong to God is judgment. What are we told? Do we have the right to judge other people? There's another thing we can't have in our house, and it's unforgiveness. And remember how Yeshua said it? He said, if you forgive your brothers and sisters, your heavenly Father will forgive you. What happens if you don't? He doesn't. And I was thinking about John Wimber and Chuck Smith. They're wonderful men of God. I watched in the MIA, I watched godly men separate because they couldn't deal with the ego thing. They couldn't deal with the judgment thing. They couldn't. And I was just thinking, you know what? God really wants to bless His people, but one of the things we have to do is let go of the things we've taken into our house that cause us to be accursed. And at this point in history, when you look at the history of Israel, and even worse, the church, we've never known how to get along with each other. Because in the end, we take grudges, vengeance, we take things. What does it say? Vengeance is mine. It doesn't belong to you. And I was thinking about this, and you know, when you get people with the strength of personality of some of these people I'm mentioning, do you know how difficult it is for them to defer to someone else? You know, we talk about it in politics, the alpha male. If you've ever been around these people, I mean, they walk into a room, they command attention. And you're asking them to give way to someone else. But Yeshua had this kind of uncomfortable thing he said. If you want to be first in the kingdom, what do? You be the servant of all. If you want to enjoy the benefits of God's provision, spiritually and physically, what happens? God gets the first. And I can show you over and over. The whole book of Malachi is about God coming to the tribe of Levi and saying, you are my inheritance, and yet you look on me with contempt and you honor the governor. Because of that, I'm going to smear crap on your face. The offal right out of the rumen on these sacrifices. You're going to stink like manure. And I'm going to do this so my covenant can continue. Somehow, God knows that Levi was going to wake up and say, God, you're first. We're going to seek you first. We're going to make you first because you are first. Your words are true. What you have said you with the house of Levi, the house of Israel, with your people, you will do it. But you're going to do that through those who understand the principles of the kingdom, and they're going to let the first be yours. The Sabbath will belong to you. The tithing will belong to you. Whatever else God has said is His, we cheerfully, willingly give. Great.
This kind of came to me in a kind of odd way. It's the same type of thing that thought I had. But I was challenged in my personal life where I like recognition.
Who doesn't?
I like people to think that I'm a good guy. I like people to think, well, yeah, he's doing a good job. And I really do. I like recognition. And as I was thinking about that one day, I was challenged by this because, well, and I believe the Spirit kind of said that, you like the sound of your own voice too much. And you need to be quiet. And it was really true. It really caught me. And so that's kind of what I've come to is that, you know, this idea of recognition, be very careful. Well, I need to be very careful of that. Because if I like the sound of my voice too much, it's not that God's not given me a voice. And there's a time to speak and there's a time to express. But if I get to a point where I like what I say, I expect other people to stand up and say, oh yeah, that was really good. Then watch out, because
Well, who's become first?
there's going to be something coming. And then there was another thought that came to me. In what I do, I've been given responsibility for doing things. And yet, I was really challenged with this too. If you find yourself or find myself in a position of manipulating or controlling stuff that has to go on, then be very careful. Because if you find that you have to control what other people do, or if you have to control what the outcome of what may happen, then boy, be careful. Because you're liable to see something, an outcome that just will blow you up.
Well, that's interesting, Greg, what you shared, because I think it is right on the thing. And I think, I think we all struggle with it. I know I have some of the same problems. And it's interesting, we sing a song that the fellow's passed away. George, what was his name?
Peter Fuller.
Yeah, the song, Not to Us, but Your Name. And I think, we say that and it sounds so good, but it's interesting what it says in Scripture, that if you humble yourself, what will God do? He'll lift you up. But what is, I know it's a real strong thing in us, isn't it, to make ourselves first, to hear ourselves. And what's amazing to me is in every case, when we do what God says, it is so much better for us. Right, Kaya?
I think for me, it's all about trust.
Well, it's faith and trust, totally.
It's trusting that we can really let Him be in charge.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like the little choice. I think I mentioned to you last week, because the fellow that said it just struck me. He said it's the fellow that could push the wheelbarrow across the tight wire over hundreds of feet. And he said, yeah, I believe he can do it. And then they said, would you get in the wheelbarrow?
And throw him off balance, and he wouldn't be able to do it.
And the fact is, in life, God asks us to get in the wheelbarrow. And we know we can, don't we? But it's still, that's a very real thing. Well, I think we better go ahead and close.